Welcome to the Bible study. It is lesson 5, a life of endurance. Here we discover 6 ways to build up the power of a spiritual endurance. Trainers draw a distinction between strength and endurance and how to build both. Strength is needed occasionally. In life, endurance is needed every day. Whether we are opposed by spiritual persecution or just the challenges of life, we need endurance, the power to persevere to the end. The trainer who helps Dr. Jeremiah to work out on a regular basis is a committed Christian. He gave him a tip about weightlifting that he believes is very applicable to the Christian life. Heavy weights lifted with fewer repetitions build greater strength. Lighter weights lifted with more repetitions build greater endurance. When it comes to life, most of us can lift a heavy weight now and again. When a major problem appears, we can deal with it. But when it comes to endurance, doing lots of repetitions with the smaller problems we confront every day, week, and month, we are not as well trained. In other words, when it comes to comparing spiritual strength and endurance, we are in greater need of endurance. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 36 says, well, quote, "For you have need of endurance so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise," unquote. We need endurance because the Christian life, as someone said, is so daily. We are always on. We must be ready at all times to be faithful and obedient. All of us are wrestling with issues all the time. As for the people Peter wrote to, telling them, quote, "not to be surprised at the fiery trial that we are going through," unquote. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12. Some troubles are because we belong to Christ. Others are simply because we live in a fallen world. But they both demand the same Christ-like response. They both demand endurance. The writer of Hebrews was writing to people who had been Christians for a while. They weren't new believers. And one of the central themes is endurance. Why? Because it appears they had endured some persecution, but now had become spiritually relaxed, maybe complacent, and had let down their spiritual guard. Then persecution began again, and there was talk among them of capitulating, of abandoning their commitment to the faith, returning to Judaism. The writer reminds them of what they had already endured. It was then that he told them not to cast away their confidence. We all have need of endurance. That is a central theme of Hebrews. After using the earlier chapters to explain why Christ had fulfilled the Jewish scriptures they had left behind, he exhorts them not to go back. He exhorts them to endure the trials they were experiencing. We need that same message. You may not think you're in a danger of going back, but we don't know what the future holds. We need endurance every day to overcome life's daily trials. In this lesson, we will discover 6 ways to strengthen our endurance. Firstly, embrace your adversity. God teaches us endurance by allowing us to experience adversity. Is going to the gym painful? Is lifting weights a form of adversity? Yes, it is. But the result of pain and adversity is strength to endure. If Jesus Christ, God's own Son, had to learn obedience through suffering, why shouldn't we? Hebrews chapter 5 verse 8. You're probably familiar with James chapter 1 verses 2 to 4, where we are told to count our trials as a kind of joy. The joy is in knowing that we will gain patience and maturity from those trials. The Apostle Paul makes the same point in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 to 4, where we learn that tribulation produces perseverance. We cannot learn to endure without being put in situations that demand endurance. Most people know who Kathy Ledecky is, the American Olympic swimmer who entered the world stage when she won a gold medal in the London Olympic Games in 2012. At age 15, she won 4 more golds at the Rio Games in 2016. She doesn't just win her races, she wins by amazing margins. As all great athletes do, she trains relentlessly. She embraces the pain it takes to rise to an Olympic level. She has a training plan and follows it faithfully. She looks for opportunities to swim against strong swimmers in order to prepare for swim meets. She does whatever it takes not to fail when the pressure is on. We have to embrace the occasional adversity that comes with our own divine training plan. We have a divine coach to guide us in the Holy Spirit, to put us through our paces for one reason. We need to endure. Secondly, surround yourself with champions. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 begins with the word therefore, which means it is building on what came just before it in Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter that lists the great and faithful saints of the Old Testament. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 calls those saints so great a cloud of witnesses. Their exploits for God are being spoken to us as we read them in the Bible. Their trials are victories in faith that serve as markers on our own faith journey. Because they endured and were faithful, so we can be. Because they made it, we know we can make it too. We need champions of the faith to encourage us. The Old Testament saints are great people to begin with, but we need living, breathing champions around us today as well as others who have gone before us. It is good to read the biographies and accounts of faithful men and women of God who endured to the very end. We can learn how they did it and imitate their faithfulness. Thirdly, find your passion and pursue it. When your passion in life is clearly defined, it makes endurance easier when there is something you really desire to attain. You will fight harder for it, like the Apostle Paul's single-minded focus on pursuing Christ. Dr. Jeremiah talks about Eliezer ben Yehuda, a Jew who devoted his life to the restoration of the Hebrew language to modern generations of Jews returning to the homeland of Israel. For 41 straight years, he devoted his life to this purpose. He wanted Jews returning to Israel from all over the world to adopt their mother tongue of Hebrew, which many generations had forgotten living in foreign lands. Until the restoration and Ben Yehuda's work on a 16-volume dictionary of Hebrew. The language was only used in religious contexts. He wanted it to become the everyday language of the Jewish people, and he lived to see his dream fulfilled. If you go to Israel today and find his grave, this is what you'll see written on his tombstone. Here lies Eliezer ben Yehuda, faithful fanatic. When Dr. Jeremiah finished reading the story of this man's endurance, he wanted nothing less than to be a faithful fanatic for Christ. The word fanatic doesn't often convey a positive image, but he's using it positively in this setting. He wants to be a man who will endure anything to accomplish God's will in his life, as did the Apostle Paul. We read what Paul went through as he endured tribulations for the sake of Christ. Paul endured and taught Timothy to endure. If we are focused on our calling in Christ, we can endure also. Get rid of what's holding you back. Back to the message of the writer of Hebrews. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1. Speaking of Olympics, have you ever seen athletes run or swim in an overcoat and boots? Of course not. They lay aside every encumbrance and wear only what will make them go faster and further. We know that unbelief, a loss of trust in God, erodes our confidence in God. And I believe that's what happened to the recipients of the letter of Hebrews. They were suffering and were afraid to go forward with the faith. They had forgotten what God had done for them in the past. They likely began doing something we sometimes do too. They started feeling sorry for themselves. They forgot the lesson that Peter gave his readers. Don't be surprised when difficult things happen. First Peter chapter 4 verse 12. Their doubt and discouragement were like weights around their necks. They couldn't stay focused on the finish line with such weights dragging them down. Encumbrances can become sins if we don't lay them aside. As Paul reminds us, whatever is not from faith is sin. Romans chapter 14 verse 23. We must identify those things in our life which either are or have the potential to become sinful encumbrances that will keep us from enduring and winning the race. Don't just lay them aside temporarily, lay them aside for good. Get them out of your life the moment they appear so you can endure without entanglements. Don't even think about quitting. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 continues, quote, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, unquote. That little phrase, let us, occurs 13 times in the book of Hebrews. Those are words of exhortation if I have ever heard them. The writer wants his audience to keep on. You can do this. Keep up. Let's go. Like a coach speaking to an athlete. The writer wants his readers not to give up. Yes, we depend on the grace of God for strength, but putting one foot in front of the other is up to us. Let us run with endurance. The book Grit is about what makes people succeed. The author, Angela Duckworth, presents two points of view. One says successful people are born with the right genes and benefit from the right advantages in life. The other says success is mainly about your passion and perseverance. What the author calls grit, the author wanted to know which of these templates is more true to life. After testing and research, the author concluded it was number two. Grit, more than genes and advantages, is the key to success. To be gritty is to keep putting one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after week after year in challenging practice. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and rise 8. One of the examples of people with grit she described is the actor Will Smith. He says the only thing that I see that is distinctly different about me is I'm not afraid to die on a treadmill. I will not be outworked, period. You might have more talent than me. You might be smarter than me. You might be all of those things. You got it on me in 9 categories. But if we get on the treadmill together, there's 2 things. You're getting off first or I'm going to die. It's really that simple. Stay focused on the goal. Finally, the key to everything is keeping our eyes on the goal. The New International Version of Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2 says it just that way, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Why? Because for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus endured the cross and the shame in order to reach his goal of restoring our relationship with God and sitting down at the right hand of God. In verse 3, the writer uses Jesus as an example of how we ourselves need to endure. For consider Jesus, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Jesus endured to reach his goal. And if we keep our eyes on him and his example, we can endure and reach our goal of finishing the race set before us again. It is God's power working within us that makes it possible. Yet we are exhorted to do the work ourselves, strengthened with all might, according to his glorious power, for all patience and long suffering with joy. Colossians chapter 1, verse 11. We need God's power in us in order to endure. In his book, Good to Great, Jim Collins tells the story of a championship high school cross-country team that based their success on a simple idea: run the best at the end. The runners didn't try to lead every race until the end, when they overtook their competitors and won. It's such a simple idea, but that idea was drilled into the thinking of all their coaches and runners. Run your best at the end. I believe we are near the end of our time here on earth. I don't know when Christ is going to return, but I do know we get closer every day. Romans chapter 13, verse 11. What I do know is that I want to run strong at the end. I hope you do as well. To do so, we have need of endurance. Grace and peace to all under the influence of my voice. I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health as you prosper in his word. Shalom.